And welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Still Curtain podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Jaggi, editor of Still Curtain. Joining me, as always, is co-host Shayne Kubas, contributor for Still Curtain. We're going to talk about some of the schedule release information that we've been given so far. NFL schedule comes out tomorrow. Shayne and I, later in the pod, we're going to give our 53-man roster predictions following the NFL draft. First, Shayne, let's start with a little bit of news here this afternoon. Arthur Marlette has been released from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and it looked like there was a kind of a falling out between the two. I think there was a contract dispute there, and something to do with the contract language. I'm sure we'll have more details later on that. But what are your thoughts on the Steelers cutting Marlette, and what do they have got in place now in terms of slot cornerbacks? Because I think that this is a team of the tall, long boundary cornerbacks with guys that really aren't capable of that role outside of Chin and Sullivan, who the Steelers traded for on day 3 of the NFL draft. How do you see this playing out now?
I think it's really interesting because, I'm not the biggest Smollett guy. I know you're not either. Most people really aren't. He's a good veteran. He plays hard, all that good stuff. All the cliches about slot corner that isn't actually that great at covering players, but it does have a hole on the defense now. I mean, Chan Sullivan was really bad last year, really really bad from really every angle you can look at, and I think they brought him in more as a depth situation, hopefully. But now he's the one who's in line, who's played the most reps in the slot that we have on the team. And unless they plan on, and we'll talk about, with some of the guys at the bottom of the roster, they have a Trey Norwood playing there maybe a little bit, and, KZ even coming down sometimes. They don't have a true slot corner who you can really trust right now on the roster. So I'm expecting a move to be made, whether it's a trade or a signing of some kind, to kind of put someone in position that can beat out Sullivan. But for right now, he kind of is all they got at slot.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, 886 snaps last year in the slot. That's substantial.
Yes.
But I don't really care how many snaps you have if the results weren't good. And that's what we've seen from Sullivan, not just last year, but I think the last 2 years from him. You go back and put on any of his film, it's kind of rough, honestly. And the unfortunate thing, though, is he literally is the only guy on the roster right now that has a bunch of experience covering the slot. And like we said, everybody else, those long boundary cornerbacks, a lot of people are pointing to Patrick Peterson right now, which I understand he's a savvy veteran. He's a former all-pro guy. It's different. And when you do it at an old age, he's going to be 33 years old. To expect him to come in there and perform at a high level is something he's not really done a lot in the past. If we're looking at just last year's snaps, Shayne, he had 8 snaps from the slot, 1,087 on the boundary. And so quite the discrepancy between the two. He's not really a slot guy. So can he do it? Potentially, but it's a lot to bank on. If you play him there and you find out Pat Peterson's, this is really not his forte at all. You'd hate to be stuck at that point and say, what options do we have? So now that Marlette is gone, I would have to assume the Steelers have something else up their sleeve, that Khan is going to do something else to add. There's obviously an open position now. We don't know how many cornerbacks are going to make the roster to begin with, but personally, Shayne, I feel like they could use one fewer boundary cornerback and one more slot cornerback on the roster.
Yes, I think so. I think we'll see that at some point during the offseason still. It's obviously still very early. We're not even into really OTAs or anything yet. Realistically, there's a lot of time before they have to really get started with camp even. So I expect a move to be made. I'm just not really sure how quickly it will be made. They do still have open spots on the roster, so.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, Chin and Sullivan last year graded out as the 96th corner among 118 qualifying cornerbacks. In terms of his coverage grade, 103rd. So not ideal, not what you want to see from that, especially with the player who started all season and played a ton of snaps for the Vikings these past couple of years. Just not a very good sample, though, in that. You'd hope that if he's the guy, he really, really needs to be a lot better than he has been. And considering that he's a veteran who's been in the league in a while, I don't think we can expect to see a much different player than the one that we've seen recently. Let's talk NFL schedule real quick here, Shayne. The schedule is going to officially come out tomorrow. We'll know everything tomorrow evening in terms of when the Steelers will be playing each matchup. I got to say, I think the NFL schedule release is the most overblown event of the entire football calendar year. It's like we already know
who they're going to play.
We already know your away opponents. We just don't know the order. And the fact that there's such a big deal made out of, when are we going to play with this opponent at this time? I don't know if people really care that much. Maybe they do. But I mean, it's a big thing. They're going to release social videos. Each of the teams' social accounts will. So What are your thoughts on the schedule release? Do you agree with me, or do you like this time of year?
I feel like I'm kind of in the middle because like I can understand the appeal of like, okay, this is, we're gonna you can create narratives out of it, right? Like, oh, we're gonna play
Yeah, sure.
these teams
Yeah.
in a row, or like, oh, this is when we're gonna face like, when is Aaron Rodgers gonna play? I think they're playing the Packers this year, so like, when are they gonna do that? Like, and obviously there's travel aspects, like people have to plan stuff around that. Like, there's reasons to be like excited for it to a certain degree, but yeah, we know who we're playing already.
Yeah.
Right. Like, it's not like they're announcing who we're gonna play. That would be obviously more of a big deal if they did all of that at the same time. But considering they're not, it seems pretty straightforward. Like we have real quick, I have to throw this up here. We have Andrew chiming in already. Bring that news interesting with apparently Malik Willis may not be long for the Titans roster even this year, which is still crazy to me, but whatever. But
yeah, according to that report from Ben Arthur of Fox Sports, said that he thinks that Willis is on the outside looking in. Tennessee only keeps 2 quarterbacks on their roster typically. That might change.
Obviously,
they went and got Will Levis. So
with that 3rd quarterback rule, that might change, honestly, for a lot of teams.
It could, yeah. I mentioned that too in my article this morning on Willis, that the 3rd quarterback rule could definitely change their opinion in terms of historical trends as far as that goes. I mean, if the Steelers wanted to throw a late round pick at Malik Willis to get a guy on a rookie deal, 3 years left on a rookie contract, they need a QB3. It's not going to be Tanner Morgan. We don't think, I don't want to give any spoilers. We got our roster predictions.
He at least could bring them potential value down the road if he develops well as a backup and proves like kind of what you've seen in the past, where some teams can move on from backups for a better draft pick than they got them for. So.
Yeah, and obviously Willis is not progressing like they had hoped. But again, if the Steelers are talking about a QB3, you're not getting a guy that's coming in for Kenny Pickett. So I don't have a problem with anybody throwing that out there to say, all right, we can have interest there. I would have interest as well, because as a QB3, you're looking for a developmental guy on a cheap deal, and that's exactly what Willis is. And if he's no good, then he's no good. But is an interesting little tidbit this morning. Back to the schedule release real quick here, Shane. A couple notes from that we have. Oh man, where I wanted to go somewhere. I think the biggest thing for me, this is where I was going to chime in right before that. I think the biggest thing for me, Shane, is how the games play out in terms of like, is there a really hard slate?
That's
like last year is like that. Yeah, last year their first half schedule was brutal.
Oh, and I think it was.
That led to them getting in such a hole. They started the season
2-6.
Yeah, and so as long as they can avoid something like that, like that's the biggest thing that I'll be looking for in the schedule release. So if they get like those like Ravens, Bengals, 49 or something like that back to back to back, it's not ideal situation. Obviously you want to see the AFC North games when the home games are the away games. I doubt they'll start the Steelers with a divisional game at first, but we've seen it in the past, starting with Cleveland or something like that. So interested to see where those AFC North games come in, and where is the hardest slate going to be? Is it going to be at the middle of the season? End of the season, so could be very different than how it looked last year. Obviously, overall, it doesn't look too bad. I mean, from the opponent list that we've seen, at least.
Right, 3rd place schedule helps.
Yes. 5 international games this year, Shane. We do know that now. Those have been released. Jaguars are going to be playing back-to-back games in London.
The London Jaguars, right? They're just prepping for the future. I don't know about
That's
that.
Right.
But I don't know
the Steelers have none, thank goodness, because I'm not a big fan of the international games and having to watch the games at 9:30 in the morning. There's going to be a Black Friday game for the first time ever this year.
Okay.
So the Dolphins and Jets are going to be competing with Walmart and Best Buy, I guess.
I mean, half the time, usually it's Thursday night anyway. Now it's not even Black Friday anymore half the time. So.
That's true. That's true. It's it's all the shopping's done by then. Christmas Eve game, it was announced. It'll be the night game on Christmas Eve, like the Steelers had last year. It's going to be the Giants and Eagles this time around, and the New Year's Eve game is going to be the Bengals and the Chiefs, that should be an interesting
big one. Yeah.
All right, Shane, we are going to jump into our draft discussion here. Shane and I are going to go back and forth here. We're going to give the thing that we like most about each Steelers draft choice and the thing that we like least about them. And we'll kind of see if we match up with our opinions here at all. Definitely things to love about all these guys, but also some cause for concern as well. So Shane, if you would like to start us off, let's go right top of the order here. Start with Broderick Jones, Steelers first round offensive tackle. They moved from 17 to 14 up to take Broderick Jones, obviously freakish Georgia player. Tell us your favorite and least favorite trait about Broderick Jones.
So I'd say my favorite trait, if we're going traits and not just things, I would say my favorite trait of his is just his athleticism, right? Is
Yeah.
a trump card when it comes to offensive linemen at times. We've seen some of the best players at the position. They're oftentimes, at least, maybe not elite athletes, but they're almost always above average athletes, right? It's very rare where you see a
Yep.
guy truly be like a Pro Bowl or all pro level player without having those traits. And it just, again, it's hard to block people that are as athletic as edge players typically are, right? So you have to be able to match that athleticism. And really for him, especially, like he has very good functional athleticism as well. He's great moving in space. He can do a lot of that stuff too. He's not just like in that box, where he has a little bit of agility, but he can't really get on the move. He has really all the athletic traits that you'd want. And packaged, and I think it helps him in a smaller frame than you typically see for a guy that has his arm length, sitting at about 6'4", gives him a leverage advantage that a lot of tackles don't have when they have that arm length as well. So really like his overall build and his athleticism. I think the one thing about him that might cause him trouble early on is just that his technique isn't really there 100% yet. And I think that's why, even though I'm going to probably project him to be the starter, it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't open the season as the starter at left tackle, simply
Mhm.
because if he doesn't look the part quite yet, if he's not able to handle the guys in practice and handle with technique, and he's just trying to rely on athleticism and it's not getting it done, I could see them not wanting him to, lose confidence by getting beat early on in his career and give him a little bit of time to get accustomed to everything before they put him out there. So.
Yeah, I think we're pretty much in agreement here, Shane. I love just the overall freakishness
Yes.
of a player like Broderick Jones, because you've got he's a box checker in every way in terms of tools,
Yeah.
length, athleticism. Even Shane, you can go so deep. The all-pro tackles in the NFL, almost a requirement to be an all-pro tackle is you have to have that freakish athleticism. All those
Almost,
guys are
yeah,
like
pretty much.
sub 5-second 40 type guys because you're so freaky at that position. So Pro Bowl is a different thing, but to be an all-pro tackle. And so he checks those boxes to assume that his ceiling's going to be really high in the NFL. And so I love the tools, love the package to work with their almost 35-inch arms. It moves incredibly well out in space. Biggest thing, like you alluded to already, I think that his technique really needs refinement. And if I'm to get even more specific with this, lunging and putting his head down in
Yes.
pass sets is something that scares
Yes.
me, because there's too many whiffs there at times, or where he's not hitting guys square because he's just relying on getting out there and punching somebody instead of sitting back and trusting his technique. So
Yeah.
Pat Myers got his work cut out for him for sure. But you talk about a moldable ball of clay here. It's Broderick Jones. I mean,
Yeah.
just over 1 full year of experience. I thought he got better pretty much every game. We're talking about a 5-star recruit, number 2 overall tackle recruit in the nation back in his class. And so definitely a lot of traits here. Total package not there yet. And I agree with you. I think that it's possible Dan Moore could start the season as the starting left tackle. Although if I had to guess, I'm going to say it's Broderick because of where they invested in him. They might just try to take their lumps with that. But I agree with you there. Let's go to Joey Porter, Shane. Joey Porter Jr. What is your favorite and least favorite thing about Porter?
Well, my favorite thing is, again, we're kind of going in the same vein, the frame, right? I mean, the guy's
Yeah.
just gigantic for a corner, and talking length mostly as well. Not like a
Mhm.
super, heavily built guy or anything, which you don't want a corner anyway. But I mean, again, I say this all the time. He could touch you from the other room if you guys were in 2 separate rooms. Like that's just what it is. Like it's really hard for receivers to avoid getting their hands put on by him. Like it's going to be hard for really anybody to kind of keep away from him, especially if he's able to stay on them from the start of the snap. Like it's going to be really hard to separate from him in general because he's going to be able to get his hands in passing lanes. Like it's just difficult as a receiver, especially if you're not a bigger, longer receiver, to just kind of keep him away from you. As long as he can stick to guys and he doesn't get run away from too often, like he's going to be in the play almost every time he's targeted, just by default almost. As far as things I'd want to see better, like he doesn't have the zone instincts, which for us won't matter as much. I think that he does have a lot of issues
Mhm.
when it comes to doing anything outside of kind of the press man stuff. He still has a long way to go in terms of building that profile. And I think he needs to, just in case, one, if we want to change schemes up or if we want to be able to run more zone with him, like he does have to work on that. And that might limit his role initially. I think he's going to be a starter, but there might be snaps where, if we want to run a lot of zone coverage against a certain team, he might not play as much as some of the other guys on the roster. So.
Yeah, I'm agree with those, but I'm going to go a little bit different direction. I
Mhm.
love Porter's mentality. I think he has the
Yes.
perfect amount of
Yeah.
swagger and everything that you want
Yeah.
from a cornerback. That attitude is just right, and it reminds me a lot of the guy
Guess what?
he's
His
wearing the
yeah,
same number
his
as.
yeah.
Very much like Ike Taylor in many ways. In fact,
Yes.
that ultimately became my comp. I had several different guys in mind
Mhm.
when I wrote my
It's easy.
scouting report.
It's easy.
It's
It
just
is.
so
Yeah.
easy to see. I mean, I feel like they mirror each other in so many ways in terms of their physicality, their ability to body up a receiver, win in man coverage. And then unfortunately, likewise, Shane, the thing I like least about Porter is his lack of ball skills.
Yes, the ball skills, yeah.
Just like Ike Taylor had with the Steelers. Taylor ended up having 14 interceptions in 12 years, which is a pretty bad ratio.
Yeah, it's not great.
I'm hoping it's not that bad for Porter. But then again, we've seen this guy in college for 4 years and just one interception. It is a little bit concerning. If there are studies that show that the hit rate on these corners, when you don't produce in terms of interception ball production in college, that the hit rate can be relatively low. I think Porter's ceiling or his floor, is still pretty high because he's grown up around football. He's got the right mentality. I think I see very good instincts in him. He's good on the in breaking routes. He's great within the first 3 seconds of the play. And so I think there's a lot to love there. He will be a little bit limited, however, if he's a guy that can't take the ball away. It's a big part of being cornerback, and it's something that scares me about his game a little bit. Hopefully, you can get on the jugs machine there and work on those hands a little bit. Your guy, Shane, Keanu Benton, will go to Steelers' original second-round pick here, 49th overall, out of Wisconsin. Big defensive lineman here. What do you think? What are your favorite and least favorite things about Benton?
I think his pass rush upside is the thing that I have to start with because he showed flashes of it in college, and especially, granted, this you can't put everything on the Senior Bowl tape, but he put on some really, really impressive reps at the Senior Bowl. He really did,
Yeah.
and it showed that he has a pass rush plan. He knows what he's doing. He's got the athleticism, even more so, I think, on film than he showed at the combine to do those things. And he's able to do it from, I think he can do it from the nose position, from 3-tech. I could even see him having the athleticism to sometimes play 5 a little bit, especially against the run, just because he's going to be dealing with smaller guys. I think that's something he can do, and I think that versatility as a pass rusher will help him get on the field not only early, but make him a potential guy we can look at as a number 1 interior guy at some point down the road. My biggest concern with him early on is I think that even though he profiles size-wise as a good run defender, there is moments where he really kind of just gets in the way and doesn't really make plays in the run game, which early on, if he's going to play for us, I'm not as concerned about him making the plays as I am him taking up blocks. But I do think the play strength isn't as high right now as I'd like it to be, and that showed up at times at Wisconsin. So that's something he'll have to get better at. But the pass rush, like I said, that's going to be kind of his, I think, niche eventually or early on even.
Okay. For Benton, I'm going to go with his well-roundedness and versatility.
Yeah,
I think he's a guy that you can kind of move up and down the line. I think that he has a solid blend of traits in terms of his frame, his length, his size overall. And so I think that he's going to be a guy that you can kind of shift around. I don't know what his best position is going to be. And that's part of what I like about him is I think that I personally, Shane, at watching his film, I think probably best is the 3-tech
me too,
position
as well. I think so.
So, but I do think he's a guy that's going to have some versatility up and down that line. Now, my least favorite thing, Shane, is I just don't know what Benton's defining trait is. And this is something that worries me a little bit with him. He's not a particularly he's a powerful guy, but he's not one where he's just going to bully offensive linemen. He's not particularly fast off the line of scrimmage. And so when I put on his film, and I've watched pretty much every game of his at this point, I'm looking for that defining trait. Like what's going to be your breadwinner here? How are you going to do this? And I think that he's one of those guys that described him in the past, Shane, as he's good at everything, great at nothing. And I hope he becomes great at something. And it does make me wonder the extent of his ceiling. Is he going to be a guy that is just going to be an average starter because he doesn't have any defining traits? Or is he going to be a guy he's 21 years old? He can continue to get better and prove that where he is going to be really well. Is he going to be, is his niche going to be carving out a role as an interior pass rusher where he can knife in and get after the quarterback? I want to see that defining trait. I haven't seen that from him yet. Hopefully the progress that he's continued to make, we'll see something there in the future. All right, let's go to Darnell Washington, Steelers. 3rd round pick here. And yeah, I'm not missing anything, am I?
No, you're good so far. Yep. There is one player that we'll have to talk about that we didn't list here, but I'll make sure we talk about him. But Darnell Washington.
Oh, I did. Yes, that's right. I knew that there was something I forgot in my notes, and I don't know how I did that.
Good.
So
you're good. No, I got it.
Let's talk about Darnell Washington, Steelers 3rd round pick, 93rd overall here, right?
Yep.
So, man, this guy was not expected to be here, obviously, at this point in the draft. I think that there's been a number of things written about him. I've written several articles since then. I can tell you where I had him on my board. He was 19th overall. He was 36th overall on NFL Mock Draft Database's consensus board. So needless to say, I'm a fan of this pick. But Shane, how do you feel about Washington? Give me your favorite and least favorite thing.
I think my favorite thing about him, and we've kind of talked a lot about this so far, except for with Benson, just because he's got a good frame and nothing special. The frame is just imposing, right? His frame gives him a certain floor, in my opinion, not only as a blocker, and that's kind of the main thing with his frame. I want to talk about his potential as a blocker on the move, as a run blocker, even as a pass protector in certain situations where if you go 2 tight ends, Freiermuth can be the guy who goes out for a route. You can leave Washington in and help protect this. It's probably left side, most likely, especially with either Broderick or Moore playing there. Give that side a little bit more help than we've been able to do in the past, because he truly is a guy that can sit and anchor down, especially against smaller edge rushers. I think he's going to be able to do that. And the problem is, and again, he plays tight end. So obviously nowadays, when you think about tight ends, more often we think about the receiving upside. I'm not sure if he's a guy who's ever going to be able to be that, 8 or 900 yard, 10 touchdown guy. Like, I don't know if he's going to be able to do that. I don't think he separates well enough. Certainly not right now. But he has value in the receiving game as a red zone target, as a guy, if you get on the move and let him get the ball and run over people, that he can definitely do. So it's kind of just the receiving upside is a little bit of concern, but everything else about his game feels ready to go for the NFL. So I really like that.
Yeah, my favorite thing with Washington is just the exceptionally rare size, length, and power combination that you're getting with him. You have to go years between drafts until you can find a guy like this. And honestly, there's only a few of them that exist in the NFL. And that's why, again, I comped him to Mercedes Lewis, a guy that has a 17-year NFL career and running right now, which is absurd. But I think that if the medicals check out, this is a guy that can stick around for a long time, if nothing else, because he could be an elite blocker in the NFL. And my least favorite thing about Washington, Shane, is I agree with you a little bit. I think we might be overhyping the receiving upside a little bit. I think he's a guy that can stretch the seam with deceitful speed, and he's got a massive catching radius. The problem with him is he's just not very sudden. I don't think he's particularly fast off the line of scrimmage. He rounds off his routes. He's not a particularly good route runner. He's not going to be a guy that's going to make people fake him out with head fakes or anything that way. There's always going to be probably someone on his hip pocket, because he just isn't very sudden and is not a great route runner, at least not at this point in time. And there's a lot of stiffness in those hips, and I'm not sure if he could ever be a great route runner in the NFL. Could be a receiving threat. Not a great route runner.
It's just not going to be in the same way people typically view tight ends.
Yeah.
Right. It's going to be more not like that traditional tight end stuff that people don't really see as much anymore. Those types of routes and the red zone stuff for sure. So
yeah, nowhere near on par with any of those move tight ends, as we call them today. So just not going to be that guy. But in terms of why tight ends go, the ceiling is limitless for an inline Y tight end. If you've got a question for us, please drop it in the chat.
Yes,
we would love to hear any questions you have, and Shane and I will try to answer those for you. It can be Steelers, draft related, Arthur Mollett, whatever you want. All right. Let's go to Nick Herbig here, Shane, and Steelers 4th rounder here. I can't believe that they were able to get Herbig where they did. Like, I thought he would be like a 3rd, 4th, or like maybe early 4th round. They got him at pick 132. I know he was like 77th overall on Daniel Jeremiah's board. I think he's just a good football player. The biggest question then becomes, where do you play this guy? How is his fit in the NFL? And so I'll let you start off. Thing that you like and dislike about Herbig.
So the thing I like and dislike are kind of related. So I'll start with the liking aspect of it, is the versatility, right? I think he has played and shown that he can play edge in the NFL. I think he can do that. I think it's not going to be necessarily as like a full-time starter role. I don't know if he'll ever be that type of edge rusher, but he certainly can be that third edge, the guy that threatens with speed, doesn't have a ton of power, but he's so small, it's kind of hard to get your hands on him. He's quick. He can do a lot of that stuff. He can get quick pressure when he wins, right? When he doesn't win, he might end up being a guy that kind of just has to try to stay in front of the quarterback and kind of shadow him and go after him. But when he does win, it's usually pretty quick. So I think that could really have some explosive plays occasionally for the defense. And I do think he has the athleticism, and he's even showed some chops and coverage and little short zone drops and things like that where he can play in space a little bit. So you hope that if he can't be an edge full time, maybe he can do both enough to kind of play a lot of snaps for you. But the thing I don't like, again, is I don't know if he can be a full-time player at either position, whether it be off-ball linebacker or edge. I think ideally he's a little bit of both, like I said, and I think with our system we can accommodate that. But my concern is he going to be good enough at either spot to get on the field a lot for this team? And that is still something I'm not 100% sure. But I do feel confident about him as at least this year's third edge based on where the roster's at right now.
Yeah, my favorite thing, Shane, about Herbig is just an incredible feel for the game. And that translated to insane production, insane overall grade. Last year's pass rush grade and his pass rush win rate were both through the roof, like some of the best that you'll see in college football. The problem is projecting forward, and this is my least favorite thing about Herbig, is because he's such a tweener size in the worst way, really, because he's not very heavy and he doesn't have any length at all. I mean, in terms of, I've got him pulled up right here. In terms of being compared to NFL edge rushers, Herbig's weight is in the third percentile and his length is in the second percentile. So not anywhere near the numbers that you want. And I think that he played lighter than that. Like we said, his playing listed weight was like 229. So he bulked up to 240. So this is going off of his 240 weight at the combine, is still only third percentile among edge defenders. It's just not very big. And so I do question when you are just a small, compact player the way that he is, it makes you question where his best fit's going to be in the NFL. Now, I think that he's a guy that will still hold value because he'll be a good special teams player. Steelers will still be able to move him around. Like you said, be able to use part-time, but that is my biggest fear, that he'll be a guy kind of stuck in between positions in a bad way, and that they won't be able to find that niche for him to carve out on their defense.
Yeah.
All right, Shane, Corey Trice Jr., second cornerback that the Steelers drafted, and again, one at tremendous value according to the consensus board. And Pro Football Focus had Trice 77th on their board. The Steelers got him at pick 241, and a lot of that has to do with injury concerns. So what's your favorite and least favorite thing about Trice?
So my favorite thing about him, again, is that this is a player that deserved to go higher, and it's because of a lot of things. One, he's got very good size and speed for the position. He's 6'3", 2, I think 05 is what he's listed at, possibly somewhere around there.
205, 206.
Something like that. And he plays with that size. Like, he really legitimately, he can throw his weight around. He's a good player from that perspective. He is a guy that I really think has starting upside in the NFL. The problem is, and this is kind of where I hate to do this with guys, but the injuries are a concern. Yeah. This is a guy who has, a lot of knee injuries, lower body injuries. He's dealing with, apparently, I think it's a hamstring injury based on his ACL injury that they think he aggravated because of trying to come back from that. Like, the lower body injuries scare you when you have a guy that's really, especially that is a good athlete, that you hope doesn't lose some of that as those injuries pile up. But if he's healthy, I do think this is a really good pick for the Steelers still, but that is the question. I want to see what he looks like in camp. I want to make sure he can go this year. If he's healthy in camp, definitely somebody you need to look out for sure.
Yeah, my favorite thing about Trice, traits and upside. I mean, this is you can't ask for anything more in a 7th round pick in terms of the traits and upside that Corey Trice provides. At his size, you are getting a cornerback with elite size, with elite physical tools. I mean, his cone and shuttle time were off the charts, and I think the film is really good. Like, I think his film is day 2 film. And so I love the traits, love the upside of what this guy could be. But again, I'm trying to be cautious about not overhyping him as much as I loved him pre-draft. And I had him very high on my board because the medicals are so concerning. And that is, again, the downfall. I agree with you, Shane. A history of high ankle sprains, ACL tear. And you just worry about these guys that have dealt with one thing after another. And despite playing 5 seasons at Purdue, he didn't play in all that many games, actually, because every year was cut short. One was cut short due to COVID, and the other ones were cut short due to injuries. He only played one full season, one season of more than 8 games even at Purdue. And that's worth mentioning when you're there for 5 years. So the injuries are legitimately concerning. It's why he falls as far as he did. But again, the perfect type of player that I would love to take a chance on anywhere on day 3, especially in the 7th round. So no complaints there, but injuries, a major concern. And last pick, Shane, number 251 overall in the 7th round, Spencer Anderson, offensive lineman out of Maryland. Your favorite and least favorite trait about Spencer Anderson?
It's really, for me, it's just the versatility for the favorite trade, right? I mean, this guy started multiple games at right tackle, at center. He played a lot of positions for Maryland, and I think that that is really going to help him in the NFL because I think he
Mhm.
profiles best as a center, realistically, and I think that's one of the
Yeah.
reasons he was the pick among the players that were left for the Steelers. He just has that ability to play center, and we don't have a backup center other than if you want to have James Daniels come in for center at for Mason Cole. So I think that's he's a guy that because of his versatility, he has a shot to make the roster. And we'll talk about the 53-man roster here in a little bit, but it gives him that ability to say, hey, I've played here, I've played there. Like I can work in on all these
Yeah.
spots and give you guys the ability to have someone who at least has played that spot before, right? And for me, the only problem I have with him mostly as a player, and honestly, the biggest issue is his ability on his feet. He just doesn't move very well with his feet, and especially at center, that can be a bit of a
Mm.
problem in the NFL. You want those guys to be able to move more than he probably can, realistically. I don't think it's going to make it so he can't play center or anything like that. I think that's still his best spot, but he doesn't have the light feet that modern centers typically have. And not that Mason Cole really does either. So maybe it's a pretty good fit for what we're trying to do offensively with power. But I don't view him as an upside player, right? He's a guy that if he plays, it's because someone got hurt. I think he's a true backup level player. You're not going to get much more than that out of him,
Mhm.
most likely.
Yeah, my favorite thing I think with Spencer Anderson is honestly it's the testing traits. And I know that I don't put a lot of stock in this, but we're talking about a guy that again is pushing for a roster spot. These are the guys that I want to take chances on. Tested as a
Yes.
93rd percentile athlete according to his relative athletic score. So give me these sparky type athletes late in the draft like this and throw a dart at the board and see if it sticks. And so I do like that with him. I like that all the athleticism, he checks all the boxes in terms of athleticism. My least favorite thing about Spencer Anderson is I just think that this was a guy who just felt very much like a priority free agent. Like you go and
Yeah.
watch his film. Even though he has versatility up and down the line, I don't think he played particularly well at any of those roles, but I agree with you. I do think he projects best as center in the NFL. And I think that that's his, part of that's because of his frame and his short arm length. I just don't think he's going to really cut it anywhere else. And I'm not sure he's powerful enough even to be guard, but we'll get that figured out here pretty soon. But I feel like it's fortunate for the Steelers if that's the position they choose to look at him at, because JC Hassenauer is no longer there. There is an opening at backup center. And so there's potentially a window for this late 7th round player to make your roster. And again, anytime you get a 7th round pick to make your roster, that's a win with that selection. So you can't overhype the player that he's going to be if he does make the roster at all. So you're just looking for guys that can stick. I think it's possible that he could with those traits, and maybe he'll end up landing in that position. All right. If you are a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and you'd like to support the Steel Curtain podcast, please consider subscribing to the Steel Curtain podcast on YouTube. We appreciate all of your support. All right, Shane, let's get to our 53-man roster predictions post-draft edition. We did have the Arthur Maulet news come out today, so we'll see if that changes anything for Shane. I'm going to go ahead and give myself a pat on the back, Shane, because I already had Maulet not making the roster for the Steelers. So
I figured.
I'm one
Yeah.
step ahead of the game right now.
Yeah.
But
You
but
just
we'll
had
see.
you just had the early opinion on it. That's all. Yeah.
That's all. So let's go right through these. We're going to run right down through. We'll start with quarterback. We'll go position by position. Shane, you'll give your players that you think are going to make the final 53, and then I'll give mine, and we'll run right through this. So quarterback.
Okay. So for me, the two easy ones, obviously Pickett, Trubisky, they're going to be on the roster. They're 1 and 2 firmly at this point. We don't have to worry about that. But I did a TBD for 3 because I'm not confident in any way that Tanner Morgan, the undrafted free agent, is going to make this roster. And I think it's very likely that they could bring in another quarterback during camp to compete for that 3rd spot. Maybe it's another, probably not another undrafted player, but maybe it's just a veteran that hasn't really got a chance anywhere else. I doubt it'll be Mason coming back. I know he doesn't have a team right now, but I assume he kind of is just kind of done with that whole situation. At least I assume. I don't know if there's interest there anyway, but I expect there to be another quarterback brought in to compete for the 3rd spot, and whoever that ends up being would be my guess is the 3rd quarterback.
I'm going to agree with you here, Shane. And I hate to do this because it feels like a cop out in some ways, but I
it's
just
kind
can't
of where
see.
we're at. Yeah,
It is. And you're not wrong, because I just can't see Tanner Morgan being
no,
that guy on the roster. Just
no.
you go and watch him. I turned on some Tanner Morgan film just the other day, and
Yeah,
oh my goodness, there's just nothing to work with. I mean, there's not size, there's not traits, there's not an
he's
arm. There's
experienced.
really
That's what he's got for him. He's
there's
experienced.
experience.
He's
He's got that
experienced.
going
That's
for
it.
him. Very much feels like a camp body to me. I hate to use that word, or that term. It sounds so derogatory, but he's still an NFL player. So, or at least in the NFL at this point in time. I do think that I agree with you. It's going to be Pickett, Trubisky, and to be decided. And I'm not sure who that guy is just yet. I don't think, like you, it's probably not going to be Mason Rudolph. I would have loved for that guy to have been Josh Dobbs, honestly, if he had not signed with Cleveland, because I think that he's just such an intelligent football player. And I think he's helped in the past with some of those red zone play calls.
He has.
I would have been all for bringing him back. And this is where we come back to the Malik Willis argument again. I think it's justified because the Steelers don't have that third quarterback on their roster. I don't think they'll carry Morgan through camp, and we'll see how that goes. I don't even know if he's a guy that's going to get time in preseason. And certainly if they sign somebody else, then he might not. So I'm going to go to be decided there with some free agent that we don't know of at this point in time as my third quarterback. All right, running backs, Shane. Who do you have for making the Steelers? How many do you have, and who do you have?
Right. So, do you want to throw in fullbacks for running backs, or do you want to include?
Yeah, let's throw fullbacks in with that too. Let's do.
Okay, so I'll have 4 guys total. I'll have obviously Najee Harris, and then Jaylen Warren. I do think that it's either going to be Anthony McFarland, who's still on the team right now, or we could see a return of Benny Snell to be the third running back. He's still a free agent. I know they gave his number away already, obviously. But I'm not really worried about that. I'm sure he'll take a different number to play in the NFL still. But I think we know that they love his special teams play and everything else. I think he's still a quality third back because of that. Now that we have somebody to take carries outside of Harris, but it's either going to be him, I think, or McFarland to be able to take that third role. Master Teague is still on the team. He looked good, obviously, with us in camp, but I don't expect him to outplay any of those guys. So I'll go with those 3 right now.
Okay, I am going to go with let's go start right at the top. I'll go with Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, and I've got Master Teague making it as my third. And I'll tell you
I forgot to mention, I have real quick.
Yes.
I'm going to slot Connor Hayward in as the fullback
for the purpose
of the roster. For the purpose of the roster makeup, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. Yep, I've got Teague making it as my third, and the reason why is because Benny Snell's not on. I think that if the Steelers really wanted him back, he's sitting there, he's healthy, they would have grabbed him by now. And so I think when you look at Teague, you're looking at a guy that is a big, fast running back who can play special teams. He can fill that RB3 role for them and do some of those things. I have him making it over McFarland because of his special teams ability. And it just seems like McFarland's just been falling out with the Steelers. Like, he can't get on the field. As good as he looked last year in preseason. It is. And McFarland averaged 5.7 yards a carry in preseason last year. Couldn't find his way on the roster. So even when he was activated there with some running back injuries, just never really touched the ball. And so I feel like that ship has kind of sailed on him a little bit. Unfortunately, I was hopeful because of the home run speed.
You know what I mean? Yeah, he feels just the perfect compliment. You know what I mean? He really feels.
I was too. And I know that a lot of people don't like McFarland because he's a guy that goes down on first contact and whatever. I get that. It's just hard to teach that speed. If you give the guy a crease, he can take it. And so I would like to see a little bit more opportunity than what he was afforded there in Pittsburgh. But I'm going to go with Master Teague as my third running back, just because of this size, athletic combo and ability to maybe be that special teams guy to fill in for Benny Snell there. And I agree with you, Shane, as well. I do have Connor Hayward making the team as a fullback / H-back, whatever you want to call him, a guy that can line up in the backfield, can do the H-back role and run drags out of the backfield, whatever you want to do with him, and be a solid pass catcher at that. And so a versatile player on that offense. Be interesting to see. That's one where I don't really have any doubts that Hayward's going to make the team. And
it's just what is listed at? Do they slot him back, or do they slot him a tight end?
How do you list him, and how often does he play? And especially now that Washington's in the mix here, I'm interested to see that whole dynamic. Let's go to wide receiver. Shane, who do you have making the team at wide receiver for the Steelers?
So for wide receiver, I have Deontay Johnson, of course, George Pickens, Allen Robinson, new addition from the Rams, Calvin Austin, Miles Boykin, and Anthony Miller. I think
Okay.
Olszewski is the guy that's kind of left out to dry. I don't think he just didn't do enough as a returner last year to make the team for special teams. I don't think he provides enough value as a receiver. That's where I think Anthony Miller is the last true receiver, and then Boykin is your special teams ace out of the receiver group.
I've got one different than you here, Shane.
Gotcha.
I've got everything the same except instead of Anthony Miller, I do have Gunnar Olszewski.
Okay,
And
so
my
you do have
reasoning
that.
goes
Yeah.
back to the same. I know how much the Steelers value special teams ability. And even if he's not doing it as the primary return man, he's still a good special teams gunner and defenseman. And so I can see him making the team for that. And maybe he gets a shot to redeem himself as a return man. And if he doesn't, Shane, I also look to as well, like you've got Calvin Austin coming off of IR. They can ask him to do some punt return ability. I know he's not going to be the kick returner probably at his size, but some punt return stuff. I do think that one's hard for me because I went back and forth between those two. And I know that those bottom of the roster guys, typically you have to be able to carve out the special teams role. And so if it's going to be Miller, he's got to be the punt returner. There's no way that he makes the roster if he's not the full-time punt returner. So
I think he can do that, and that's part of it too.
He
like,
could,
I think
and he has
because
got
you don't have to
experience
ask Austin to do that then either, right? You don't have to ask
Yeah.
him to do that as
That would be
with
ideal,
his
yeah.
size, which I think Miller has that skill set to be able to do that. So, and it just felt like they just kind of fell out of favor with Olszewski last year for a lot of reasons.
They did,
and I think they're going to not necessarily look for reasons to replace him, but I think if Miller plays well, because I think he would have made the roster last year if he was healthy. I really do. So it would have been.
And your guess is definitely as good as mine there. And I think that Miller is a quality slot receiver. And again, you brought back Boykin specifically for the purpose of special teams. He's not going to play offense. The other thing that I'd point to here, though, is between Allen Robinson, Calvin Austin, Anthony Miller, that's really 3 slot types. I know that's the plan for Robinson, at least, is to make him that slot receiver in his older age now and without a ton of explosion at this point in his career. So if you got 3 guys all vying for playing time in the slot for the Steelers, I don't know how that dynamic's going to work either. But I think your guess is definitely as good as mine right there. Just depends on, do you want to go with the guy with a little bit more special teams ability to at least snap wise take more snaps in terms of a coverage unit guy, or do you want the guy who's the better receiver, which I have no doubt that that's Anthony Miller. It's just that if Miller's making the team as a receiver, how much does he see the field as a receiver if you have Robinson and Austin both playing the slot as well? So that's where I struggle a little bit with that one, Shane. Let's go to tight end here. And who do you have making the team at tight end now?
Okay, so I got 3. So I got Freiermuth, of course. He's going to be the number 1 tight end. Darnell Washington should be the number 2 out by the time camp's over, I would assume. And then I do think Gentry makes the roster because I think they consider Hayward, at least from a roster standpoint, the fullback, so that we all 4 of them can stay. I do think that they like all of them. There's a reason they brought Gentry back, even though they like Darnell Washington, of course, enough to draft him. I think all those guys can fit in. I think that Gentry can be the primary, just kind of back up. Obviously, the tight end, then Washington can be the true number 2 tight end in the 2 tight end sets, which we ran a lot last year. And I think we'll run even more of them this year. I don't see them doing a lot of 3 tight ends just because nobody really does a lot of 3 tight ends. But I think all those guys have a place on the team.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. And again, I've got those same 3, 4 if you want to count Hayward. It doesn't matter what you label
super
him
utility, fullback, tight end, whatever.
Exactly. Yep. The utility, the Swiss Army knife there that can do a little bit of fullback, a little bit of H-back. But I do have those same 3. I've got Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, and Zach Gentry. I think that the Steelers, I mean, they signed Gentry obviously before they drafted Darnell Washington. They probably didn't know at the time they were getting Washington, I'm sure. But even considering that, you've got a 6'8" tight end who can act as the inline guy. Washington does have a bit of an injury history. He was healthy at Georgia last year, played all 15 games, but there are concerns about his health and longevity, stuff that way. But even if just Freiermuth goes down, like, you need another guy that you can trust to put in that. Now, I don't have any, I probably wouldn't have any concerns that you could cut a guy like Gentry. You can kind of stash that guy and bring him back later if you need to.
If you need to, yeah.
So, but I do have them reserving that spot there and labeling Hayward if they want to, if they choose to. I really don't care if they do or they don't, but playing that fullback type role and essentially replacing Derek Watt, who didn't see the field much on offense anyway. I got to ask Shane, did any part of you, did it ever cross your mind to say, maybe I want to slot like Monty Pottenbaum in here.
I mean, you always want to with a guy with not only the name but the frame and everything else. You want a guy like that to make the roster, and I think it's not outside of the realm of possibility for sure. I think there's a reason they brought him in as a true fullback because they don't have one because Hayward's not a true.
No, he's not the true lead blocking type.
Right, he's not. So like I could see it. I think it just comes down to do they value the fullback enough this season for it to be someone other than a Derek Watt? Because we knew Derek Watt was going to make the team because he's like partly Derek Watt, but he's also a good player. But I don't know if they value that position enough to use a roster spot on it now that they're not paying somebody a lot of money to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of my hang up. I wouldn't be that surprised though. And I think Gentry would be the odd man out then in that situation. So.
There aren't many teams, Shane, left that use just a true fullback like the Kyle Juszczyk. I feel like
even Juszczyk is really just a utility player too. So
he is too, because he can definitely do a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Now, I think that I mean, for a lot of reasons, that's probably why it is a dead position. The Steelers couldn't find a way to get Watt on the field for offense. He's just primarily a special teams guy. And I'm okay with them not devoting that spot personally to a true fullback. So if they wanted to have that spot for Hayward, who I think is going to make the team anyway.
Yeah.
Regardless of what you want to call him. But yeah, just not a lot of, because I feel like in a lot of ways, Shane, what tight ends can do can replicate that role. If you want to have one in split back or whatever, doing that.
Just put Darnell Washington.
Yeah, if you got some mobility,
just let him run out the corner. Yeah,
I know so they overlap a little bit, but obviously tight ends are more versatile. They can do more in the passing game. They can actually line up in line and do things that fullbacks can't do. So, you know what, Shane, I threw this out here when the Steelers said that they were going to make Kendrick Green a guard. And I was one of the few I feel like at the time saying it's not going to work because this guy is struggling with power at center. If you struggle with power at center, you're going to get blown over as a guard. And that's exactly what we saw. At the time, I'm like, all right, I know this sounds absurd, but you spend a 3rd round pick on the guy. Maybe try the guy at fullback. Maybe try, if you want a lead blocker type, you got a 300 pounder that runs a 4.85. So, I mean, at least try him as a fullback. He's failed on defense, obviously. In Illinois, they had to switch his position, the offensive side of the ball, and it just hasn't worked out anywhere. He is an athlete, though. I would have liked to seen that. I don't think we're going to see it.
No,
I think he's going to be a guy that gets pushed off the roster here, and we'll talk about that next. So let's talk about the offensive line here, Shane. And however you want to do this, you can go tackles first or just go right.
I think I'm going to start with tackles just to kind of get them taken care of. So I think it's going to just be the projected starters from last year and Jones. So it'll be Okorafor, Moore Jr. and Jones. I don't think anyone else makes it. I know that they signed Clark, but I think that was just, he had the size profile. I think he'll be there in camp, but I think they keep 3 true tackles on the roster ultimately. Broderick Jones, of course, the rookie.
Okay, I've got the same as you, Shane, there. I think that it's a stretch probably to believe that the Steelers are going to keep a 4th tackle. It seems like they typically keep one swing guy, and in the event of an injury, then they'll bring somebody else up. So I do have LaRaven Clark missing the cut as well. I have Dan Moore bumping down to be that swing tackle for the Steelers this year. And so I've got those same 3. What about your interior offensive line?
So for guard, I have Ciamolo, obviously the new addition there, Daniels, Herbig, and Dotson for the guards, for the true guards. So those are the 4 guys I think will be the true guards. And then for center, I have Mason Cole, and then I flirted with the idea of just having Mason Cole, and I think that's still very likely. But for the sake of this exercise, I went with Anderson. I think that there's a reason they took him specifically. The 7th, I think they view him as a guy who can play a little bit everywhere, and they can kind of slot him in as that super utility offensive lineman. I still wonder about his real ability to play long-term, but I think that with the way the roster is right now, where they might want to have somebody who maybe shouldn't play right tackle in the NFL, but has played right tackle at college, like he has some of that versatility. I think he could make the roster if he plays well enough in camp.
Yeah, this one I struggled with a little bit here, Shane. And ultimately, I went with one fewer spot on the offensive line.
And that's where I struggled with it. Yeah.
I had the same exact names that you did minus Spencer Anderson. I have Spencer Anderson being a cut and stash practice squad guy. And the reason for that is if there happens to be an injury to center, Mason Cole gets injured, James Daniels has past center experience.
Yes,
you can then bring up a guy. Yeah. My problem was I had a hard time with a guy like McCollum or Anderson being a roster worthy player over some of the other guys. So I feel like that's a guy that you can bring up in the event of an injury. Obviously, Steelers were very fortunate to have the offensive line health they did last year. It's not guaranteed to be the case again. I would like to have a true center backup like that JC Hassenauer type. And just at this point, I really couldn't put one on the roster. So I just went with
I
8
don't
total
blame you
offensive
for
linemen.
that. Yeah, that's probably the more likely thing. I wanted to see how it kind of looked with Anderson making it because I think that is
Mhm.
still a possibility, but it might mean
Yeah,
just
for
again
sure.
somewhere else a player that's probably better maybe overall might not
It
make
could
it
be
then.
the
Yeah,
Tanner Morgan type thing again, where
yeah,
that guy might not be here yet. So,
possibly. Yeah.
interesting there. So we're pretty close on that. This is the first position so far that I have one fewer guy than you, I
Yes.
believe.
Yep. I think
So,
so.
okay, let's go right to the defensive side of the ball now. Let's talk about the interior defensive linemen here. You can call them what you want, defensive ends, defensive tackles, whatever. I don't particularly love using the old terminology
It
here,
doesn't
Shane,
make
because it's
sense
just,
anymore.
no,
It
and
doesn't.
they don't play a ton of 3-4, so much to the point where you have to use. I think
Yeah.
I love the saying you've got edge defenders, you've got your interior defensive line, and
Yes.
then on the interior defensive line, call them a 0 tech, 1, 3, 5,
5,
4-eye,
whatever.
whatever, because those guys slide around. A lot of them are very versatile. So,
Base
who do you
defense
have?
is dead, just so everyone understands that. Base defense doesn't
Yes,
really exist, at least not
it very
3-4 and
much is.
4-3. It doesn't exist
Yes, it
anymore.
very much is. It's most of what Steelers do is some variation of a nickel. So,
Yes.
and that's what you're getting most of the time anymore for most of these teams. So, Shane, who do you have making on the
This
inside defensive
this
line?
one I struggle with a good bit as far as not only the names, but the total amount, but I ended up with 6 guys total. I have, of course, Hayward there is the main guy. Ogunjobi signed the extension. He's going to be or signed the new deal. He'll be there.
Yeah.
Benton, DeMarvin Leal is kind of their move piece. I do think he's going to play a little bit of edge at times for this team just because of the depth concerns there. I do expect that to happen, but have him slotted interior defensive line. Loudermilk and Fehoko. Those are the 6 guys that I
Okay.
had. And I think Fehoko is one I struggle with because I don't really love him as a player, but he's really the only true nose type ish, other
Yeah.
than if you want to throw Keonu in, which I think is where he'll play a lot, Benton, just because that's where he can slot in easily. But Fehoko is the only other real true like nose type on the roster currently. So I had him as the 6th guy.
Okay. Shane, this is where I got my extra guy back here. So
Yes. That's
I
where the
cut
difference
one on
is.
the
Yeah.
offensive line. I kept one on the defensive line.
Right.
And you had Montravius Adams missing the
I
cut,
did.
correct?
Yes.
I
Yeah.
do as well. So I have the same 6 names that you do, but I also have them keeping Armon Watts just
That's the
because
one I
of,
struggle with. Yeah.
yeah, it just because of his versatility, his starting experience in Chicago, a guy that you can kind of move around there. I don't know for sure. Like I don't feel confident in that. But if I am to cut one on the offensive line, I like putting one back into the defensive line because there's a lot of guys there, and it might not be Watts. It could be Loudermilk. Honestly,
Yeah.
I don't think that the Steelers loved the progress that he made this past year, and I want to say I like the potential of getting the big long guy there that can kind of hold up at the
Mhm.
point of attack. He needs to be better as run
He does.
defender and
Yeah.
a pass rusher. And
He
I
does.
just
Yeah.
don't see, I haven't seen a lot from him yet. So it could be Watts or it could be Loudermilk, the odd man out. If they don't go with 7, if they only go with 6, like you predict, I think it's
Mhm.
one of those 2 guys, the guy out. But I do agree with you that Fehoko is relatively safe because he is that true nose tackle type. The Steelers are obviously going to be losing Tyson Lulu, who was really no good last year in his old age, coming off of that ankle injury. And then I see no reason to keep Montravius Adams. I mean, you can save a little bit of money there.
Yeah.
The guy was not very good last season. And so I think that's part of the reason why you went out and signed 2 interior defensive guys. And you drafted one in the 2nd round as well. And it's kind of like bonus here, Shane, because now not only do you have this draft class of these 7 picks that the Steelers are getting this year, you're getting DeMarvin Leal back from IR, who spent 6 games on IR and played limited after that.
Mhm.
You're getting Calvin Austin back. So it's kind of like you're getting kind of bonus rookies here this
Kind
year.
of.
Red
Yeah.
shirt rookies, if you will.
In a certain way. Yeah, for sure.
Let's go to the edge position. So edge defenders, Steelers, we know historically keep 4 of these guys, but what do you have them doing, Shane?
So I do have 4 as well. Again, it's just kind of an easy one. I feel like it's really easy to come
Okay.
up with these 4 guys and be done with it and not have to think too hard. Watt, obviously, TJ will be the primary guy, of course. Alex Highsmith. Again, we have Nick Herbig coming in. I think is going to be the 3rd edge ultimately once the season starts, and then Quincy Roche returns, and this time I assume will make the Steelers 53.
Okay, Shane, I've got the same 4 as you,
Mhm.
but I really, for my 4th, instead of saying Roche, because he's already been a guy
Mhm.
that's been caught and brought back to the team, I really wanted to do the cop out again and say an outside free agent for that
Right.
guy, and then maybe bump Herbig, at least for the temporary, down to edge 4, the
That's still
special teams
possible, I'm
guy.
sure. It just
Yeah,
depends what they do.
I think there's like a coin flips chance that they go out and get a veteran edge player. If I just had to guess right now, because I just knowing how banged up Watt has been these past 2
Yeah.
years, obviously missed half the season last year and it wasn't completely healthy when he came back. Can they afford to have another Malik Reed situation on their hands? Not saying that Herbig is going to be that guy. Obviously,
Right.
like Herbig a lot better than that, but you're still talking about an undersized rookie who has to come in and play a pretty sizable role from day one. And so I just feel like there's going to be an outside signing, and maybe it doesn't happen, Shane, until roster cut downs. I don't know. It might happen like at the beginning of the season.
There is a guy that I wanted to throw out there that I think is still unsigned. That would be a nice snipe from a division rival. Justin Houston is still sitting out there, I'm pretty sure.
Houston is. Yeah, he is. He's so old now, but you think the guy's production is going to fall off at some point.
He's been productive.
He still does one thing really well, and that's getting after the quarterback. He's got that good first step, and he's always been good at that aspect of his game. So interesting name to throw out there. I feel like the problem, Shane, is people get this idea stuck in their head like, well, it didn't work out with Melvin Ingram. Let's never go out and sign a good edge 3. That's the wrong mentality. In fact,
you can't.
Honestly, I think to be quite honest, I think the Steelers mismanaged the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
Instead of playing Watt and Highsmith so many snaps when you had a very capable player in Ingram riding the bench, I think there should have been a healthier rotation of the 3 guys personally.
It would have been
because
smart,
you want to keep these guys fresh. It's not about how many snaps you play in the regular season. It's about getting Watt to the playoffs and having him be completely healthy. And I think they mismanaged that situation with Ingram a little bit 2 years ago. But I don't want a Malik Reed situation. I would much rather have a falling out with a quality pass rusher than having to rely on a guy that has no business being there. Right. I'm hoping that Herbig can be that guy. I'm very hopeful about Herbig. I had him much higher on my draft board than where the Steelers ultimately took him at pick 132. But again, lots to prove, especially considering that frame. So that'll be interesting. But as for now, I do have the same 4 edge players as you. So Shane, let's go to linebackers, off-ball linebackers.
Yeah. So this one also was pretty easy for me. You got Colt Holcomb. You bring him in to be your linebacker 1, and then Landon Roberts. I think definitely makes the team either because of special teams or because he may be the second starter there possibly as well, depending on how that shakes out. Mark Robinson, I assume, will also make the team as well, try to compete for that linebacker 2 spot as that run defender. And then Tanner Muse, I think, also makes the team. He's got some versatility to him. So I think those 4 make it.
Okay, and I'm in complete agreement with you here as well. I think that probably if the Steelers wanted a guy like Marcus Allen, he would have been brought back by now. I think Tanner
so
Muse was essentially brought in to be Marcus Allen, and maybe a little bit more. We'll see. I mean, he's got athletic traits. He just has primarily been a special teams guy. He hasn't really panned out.
I think he is a better bet if you had to play him at linebacker. I think he'd be a better bet personally too. So
I think he probably would be as well. Linebacker room looks very different this year, and they weren't about to go with
deservedly so.
Yes, they cleaned house there, and I'm glad they did. And it might not prove to be much better than it was before, but it was a very necessary thing.
It'll be hard for it to go more poorly. So,
especially if you really looked at like the advanced metrics when Miles Jack was on the field, the Steelers stats were ugly. I mean, in terms of yards allowed in the passing game, yards allowed per rush, all of it was just bad. And his average tackle depth was like way down the field. It's like he didn't offer anything that you were hoping that he would have at that buck roll for them there. So I've got the same 4 guys making it. I'll be interested to see if Robinson can kind of carve out maybe a little bit bigger role this year. Him and Roberts, I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of those guys' play style and how they win. Holcomb, I think, is going to be that MAC linebacker, that full-time guy that plays in dime there as well. So
I hope so.
And hopefully he can stay healthy. That's the other thing with him coming off the season-ending injury there. All right, let's move to cornerbacks. Shane, who do you have for corners?
Okay, so I got Patrick Peterson, of course, the big free agent signing for us, if you want to consider him a big free agent signing at this point. Porter Jr., of course, Levi Wallace, and then this one I want to preface with it's going to be either Corey Trice, hopefully, if he's healthy enough to make the roster and play, or it could be Witherspoon if he is also healthy and play as well. One of those 2, I think, will be a lock. And then James Pierre, special teamer, kind of can play anywhere out in the corner, which is good too. And then Shannon Sullivan / corner that to be brought in later. I think that his spot is the one that I'm looking at to hopefully not have to be the slot corner, right? Or at least not the primary slot corner. If they bring someone else in, I think he'd be the first guy I'd be looking to let go. But we'll see if that's how it ends up working out. But I do expect a move to bring in another corner to compete there.
Okay, so if I got this right, Shane, did you have 7
I had
corners?
6 corners, and
6
then
corners.
yeah,
Okay,
Sullivan is the 6 corners, and then someone could possibly I
gotcha.
see brought in to replace him. Yeah.
All right, I believe if I got that right, I believe I have the same as you. I've got Patrick Peterson, Joey Porter Jr., Levi Wallace, Akella Witherspoon, Shandon Sullivan, Corey Trice Jr. Did you have Witherspoon? Did you
So
say you had?
I did not have Witherspoon. So I had again
Okay.
Peterson, Porter Jr., Wallace, Trice, or Witherspoon. I think Witherspoon
Oh,
knocks
okay.
off the roster if Trice is healthy enough to compete. Then you have James Pierre, and then Shandon
Okay,
Sullivan.
that's where I did not have James Pierre
Okay.
this time around. I've got Steelers making up the difference in terms of the special teams defensemen with Gunnar Olszewski.
Yeah, that's where I think
And
we
so
differ. Yeah.
that is the one difference. It's just hard for me because I feel like if Witherspoon is healthy, he's clearly a better option than Pierre. Just struggles so bad with speed down the field, and so I think you are getting that guy. You know who he is on special teams at this point. But again, if the Steelers are to make a move, I do agree with you there, Shane. At that point, if the Steelers feel like they need another guy that can play nickel, play the slot, I would have Witherspoon missing my roster at that point, assuming that Corey Trice is healthy through camp. I just think that there's no reason to give up on that guy who's the 98th percentile athlete that you found, this gem in the 7th round. I expect him to look good because the tape is really good in college, and the run defense was fantastic at Purdue. And so if he's healthy, I expect him to look good, and I expect him to make the final roster because he's a much better developmental cornerback prospect type than they've had in years. I don't remember the last one they've had at that position. It's honestly probably like Justin Lane, but I didn't love Justin Lane's film as much
Lane didn't
in college.
show
He was
the upside that Trice
no,
showed.
and he was such a project in being that former wide receiver to corner convert and didn't have much experience there. So no, I really do like Trice. I think they will make the roster. Those are my 6. Let's move on to safeties.
So for safety, you got your starters, Fitzpatrick and KZ, I assume, will be the other starter there most of the time. Keanu Neal will be kind of their third safety, I assume. Norwood, I do expect to continue to play on the roster. I think he's a dark horse to play slot reps if they don't add to the slot corner from where they're at now. I think that his instincts and ability to play in short areas would be really useful there. I think that's really kind of his probably best spot if you need him to play realistically, because he's not going to be a safety in the back end, doesn't have the range for that, but you can play in the box and play down, I think, at slot as well. And Killebrew as the special teamer type guy that can also play a little bit of defense if need be.
Yep, I do have those same 5 as well, Shane. I've got Killebrew as a special teams guy. I agree with your assessment on Norwood. If they don't add that other guy to go with Sullivan there or to push him at all, I think that Norwood can kind of carve out a bit of a role there. He only did have 33 special teams snaps last year. I don't think he played particularly well. So I think he's a guy that's maybe closer to that roster bubble.
He is. I think it comes down to, do they want 4 guys they feel comfortable playing defense? And I think he can play on the defense in some role enough to make the roster over some other guys. So.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And if it was me personally, Shane, I would contemplate just keeping 4 at the safety position. But I know how much the Steelers love special teams and what Killebrew has done for them.
He has been very good there. Yeah.
So, we're in agreement on that as well. So let's just look at specialists and we'll round out this show here.
This one should be pretty simple, but I think that there is obviously a question at punter right now, but I'll get to that. Boswell, obviously he will be the kicker barring some sort of injury / weird thing going on. He is definitely a kicker. Had a rough year last year, but a lot of that I think was more about decision-making when to kick field goals than it was about him sometimes. There's some questionable decisions from that perspective. So, and I do actually, as of right now, and I'm hoping that I'm wrong about this, but this is me kind of just assuming, I do think Braden Mann will be the punter ultimately once camp is done. I think that he will be able to retain that. I think he'll be able to come in and take that spot. And then Kuntz, of course, will be the long snapper. So no question there.
Okay, and I just have one difference from you. I don't have Braden Mann. I do have Presley Harvin.
And I hope that is
making the team once again.
I really do.
Yeah, and again, there's something to be said. If the competition is close enough, Shane, the Steelers just seem more apt to go with the guy they spent the draft pick on. And that's really my only logic in terms of deciding that position, because I think Mann probably in training camp would have to be notably better. If it's they're comparable, I think that they ultimately go with the guy that's on the rookie deal, the guy they spent the draft capital on. And it just seems like something that they've done most of the time in the past. And so I've got Harvin making the team once again this year. Obviously, Chris Boswell and then Christian Kuntz is the long snapper. Rarely do they ever get rid of those long snappers. How long was Greg Warden there for?
Oh, man.
Outrageous amount of time.
Some stupid amount of time. Yeah, it's usually what happens. Good job.
Yeah, those guys go a decade plus.
If you can get it, good quality gig if you can do it.
Oh yeah. That's with job security at that.
Oh yeah. So, but yeah.
All right. Well, that's our show today. So if you want to check out my 53-man roster prediction in its all of its detail, please go to stillcurtain.com.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today on the Still Curtain podcast. You can follow Shayne on Twitter at Shayne Kubas. You can follow me on Twitter at Tommy Jaggi. You can download the Still Curtain podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and also check us out on YouTube and subscribe. Thanks for listening to the Still Curtain podcast.